everyone. Good afternoon. Very nice to have you all here. I'm always excited when I see new faces in the audience coming to the Women's Pavilion. So welcome to all your excellencies, to our distinguished guests, our virtual audience. A very warm welcome to you all. We're really excited for this session of Vision and Journeys. The Vision and Journeys is really our attempt at creating a space that is a little bit more informal, that of course the policy discussions are critical to advancing the agenda of women's empowerment, but that's not all, right? We want to understand from leaders such as yourself, people who have been working in the field, people who have advocated for this agenda, what is their vision for a gender equal future and what their journey has been. Because sometimes you can learn just as much from the personal understanding and perspective of somebody as you would from a policy discussion. So we are really excited to have you, Kampeta Sayinzoga. She is currently the Chief Executive Officer of the Development Bank of Rwanda. That is a very important position. Rwanda has excelled on so many levels, and I'm sure that your work has been instrumental in driving the country in that journey. Ms. Kampeta, you have 16 years of progressive professional experience as an international development practitioner in both public and private institutions within Rwanda and the East African region. Prior to joining the bank, you were the Director General of the National Industrial Research and Development Agency under the Ministry of Trade and Industry. You also served in the Ministry of Finance and Economic Planning for over a decade as the Permanent Secretary and Secretary to the Treasury. We're really excited to have you here. Please, can we give her a round of applause? Thank you. I'm going to start by telling you that Rwanda is actually one of the countries that I find very intriguing. Its history is fascinating, complicated, but the way that Rwanda has been able to build back after some very difficult years and a very difficult and bloody conflict, and the role that women have played in that is something that I've always wanted to ask somebody who could give me more knowledge on that. So please, can we start off by talking about that and tell me everything you know?
Thank you very much for having me, and thank you all for coming, and congratulations. The Women's Pavilion is just so powerful. It's really a transformational experience. Starting with Rwanda, I would say, first of all, people know Rwanda because of the genocide, but our history goes far way back. And a lot of the initiatives that we have, including the initiatives on women empowerment, actually are drawn from our own culture. Culturally, women were not disenfranchised. Women played a very strong role, including financial decision-making in the community. So when you look at the history of when women started being disenfranchised, it's actually at the time of colonization and some of the more Western influence, right? So going back to our roots was something that was necessary as our people started the liberation movement that liberated the country from the genocide. So we often start the story of women empowerment after the genocide, but actually before colonization, we had a very gender equal society. And then during the liberation struggle, women played a very, very strong movement on the front line, providing support, being there. And therefore, integrating women into the development agenda after the genocide and the reconstruction phase was kind of a natural continuation of what had happened for so many years. I think the power of the story of Rwanda is that they were given a platform. And I think very many times what we lack is actually a platform for these extraordinary women, of the generation before us to be able to do what they did. So I think that's where leadership, and for me, that's the first thing, leadership is key. Because leadership is really about providing a platform for us to be the best that we can be, right? At the end of the day, that's the job of a leader. If you are a visionary leader, you need to create an environment where people can be the best. And I think often we think about leadership as a prescriptive kind of role, where sometimes it's just getting out of the way. And I think in our case, our leadership was able to create a platform where women could thrive, where women could contribute, where women could be the best that they could be without it feeling like a struggle. Yeah.
That's really interesting. I mean, we talk about the UAE's history. We talk about how the UAE is #1 regionally in the UNDP's Gender Inequality Index, for example. And, I had always talked about it with the vision of our leadership. Our founding father always used to say, women, nothing makes me happier than to see women take their rightful place in society. And he established the UAE with that principle. And everybody followed suit. And I was talking to a colleague of mine the other day, and she said, that's not our starting point.
Yeah.
These principles were there before. Sheikh Zayed, God rest his soul, didn't just dream of that. This is embedded in our culture. This is embedded in our history. This is embedded in the way that we have done things. So it has roots. And I think this is what we were also talking about a little bit before, that feminism, the idea of equality, the idea of women being empowered is not something that was created somewhere else. It is something that is homegrown. Would you?
Totally. I think it is homegrown, it is rooted in our culture, but also, I mean, in the case of Rwanda, and I'm sure there are very many similarities, and you were talking about the founding father of the UAE, is really the idea that you cannot exclude 50% of your society and expect to have fast economic growth, stable society, communities that are thriving. It just doesn't work. And the second thing is really that is particular about our own history was the fact that our leadership did not present it as an agenda of women fighting for their rights. It presented it as an agenda to make the communities better and therefore requiring men to play a role in this agenda. So the dialogue was not you women fight for your rights and we'll give you a platform. It was us as a society, including men, come to the table, because if we bring these ladies to the table, our companies are going to make more profit, our communities are going to be more peaceful, your wives are going to be happier, and we know that's a benefit to everybody. The kids are going to have better education. The country's GDP is going to grow much faster. So it was really a point of argument to say, can we not make this about women fighting for their rights? And can we make this about communities ensuring that these women have a seat at the table? And I think it's a different way of looking at it, because then you understand feminism as a broader concept with, our president is the champion of he for she, which is, men who stand up for women's rights and for girls' rights. And to say, well, the point is not so much that, we all have a mother and a sister. The point is that we need our communities to do better, and they're not going to do better as long as our mothers and sisters don't have a seat at the table. So it's a different way of looking at it, and I think that's what has worked for us, because then Parliament came on board to do some legal reforms. Then the quotas, were introduced and were welcomed. Then, women in position of power, you mentioned Parliament, with 61%, became kind of natural, because if within your party you have women, if within the League of Disabled people living with disability, you have women, then these numbers eventually add up. And in our case, they added up to 61%. But I want to come back to one point, which I think is also our story, which is the power of recognizing the bias. And I often feel that this is a conversation that doesn't take place. and us being able to sit as a society and say, but what are our biases? Why are women not making it to, being judges or top judges? Why are women not being CEOs of banks? Why are women not being represented in parliament? Where is the bias? Because in the short term, you can put quotas, but if you don't remove the inherent bias, then you've not addressed the problem. And I think it's a difficult conversation because, it's hard to see your own bias. But being able to sit and say, well, it's not because we don't have enough women to become board members. It's not because we don't have enough women to become CEOs of banks. So there are other factors that are actually preventing them to get where they are. And can we address those, in a deep way? And I think that's where most societies really struggle. We were lucky, our leadership was very bold, so we managed to have that conversation as a country.
That's that is on the money, as they say. And I think, this is also what we're trying to do in this pavilion, right? As you saw, the principle that we want to tell the world, when women thrive, humanity thrives. And the reason that we, our exhibition was under the title of New Perspectives, because we recognized that we know what to do on a legislative level. We know what to do on, on every avenue. This agenda has been on the table for years and decades. But as you said, the thing that we haven't been able to crack is our mindsets, and it's that bias. So in addressing those biases, what are some of the strategies that you have seen be effective in changing the conversation?
So I think there are a couple of things. The first thing is really what this Women's Pavilion has done, which is fantastic, which is creating and celebrating role models. I think it's important for girls and women to visually see that you can be the CEO of the bank, you can be a pilot, you can go into these non-traditional roles, and society will reward you for it. And that's a very powerful message, to be able to not only do the work. I was smiling at the Matilda factor downstairs, where women do the work and the credit gets kind of hijacked by a man. But it's important for girls, young girls, to know that you can do the work and reap the benefits and reap the credit of it. That is number one. Now, in our daily lives, and maybe I'll share the experience of BRD, the bank that where I am currently, some of the small things that we've done, right? Things like putting pads in the bathroom was a game changer for women in the bank, because now you can meet with a client, you can stand up without holding your bag. It's something really small, but it's quite liberating in its own way, right? Allowing women to take their sick leave, to take care of their children and their parents was also a very big thing, because we don't realize that women have less annual leave per year, because they spend so many of their annual leave days just taking care of the kids, taking care of their parents. Now, in an equal world, that burden should be shared equally. Exactly. But we're not there yet. So can we do something during the transition, right? Being able to have family-friendly homes, COVID showed us that the actual, the way we thought about family and work was very segregated, and maybe there is some good things about mixing the two. So having a daycare at the office, allowing the kids to come and spend time at the office, having a safe space for people to work while their kids are around, and demystifying the fact that home is home and office is office was very important. Providing mental health support at the office, because at the end of the day, we now know, thanks to COVID, that you actually bring your home into the office. If you're suffering from domestic violence, there's no way. It's going to be very hard for you to be top performer at the office. So a lot of these dynamics that before were kind of segregated into different boxes, we have now learned that when you mix them up, you actually create a better working environment for women to take up leadership roles. I'll just give you one small example that came out of one of our staff engagement survey. So we did a staff engagement survey in the bank, and the company had a very low score in terms of training. And I was quite surprised, because we offer very good training opportunities. Why were these ladies not happy with the training opportunities? So I talked to them, and their response was very simple. They said, look, we are joining the finance world. We're 25 to 35. We're having our first child or second child. Your training opportunities require us to move and travel because we're trying to expose them to the world. What do I do with my kids? I don't know. I don't take the opportunity. And indeed, as she's not taking the opportunity, she's lagging behind in terms of opportunities for promotion and career development.
Yeah.
So allowing them to travel with their children and their nanny was a big thing for them because all of a sudden they had, the world of training opportunities kind of opened up at the time when they needed it the most, because the next promotion is most likely a managerial promotion. So I just want to unpack, these biases that are around us every day, and that if we don't have strategies, as you rightly said, to tackle them, then if you're not deliberate about it, then nothing is going to happen. I mean, at the national level, of course, there are also strategies in terms of having access to finance, which was a big issue. So the government had to put up very innovative way of allowing women to access microfinance, and the digital payment platforms have also been very helpful in terms of access to finance. So once you're deliberate, once you understand that this gap is not a natural gap, there's an obstacle somewhere, then finding strategies that are tailor-made to the problem becomes the easier part.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I love everything that you're saying, because I do think that we need to be deliberate, right? The question that keeps coming back to me and sort of gnawing at me is, how do we develop strategies to not only respond to women's needs, not only respond to their, career progression and road to leadership, but have you had an experience of tackling the biases that actually men have?
So I'll give you a funny story. We had a discussion around sexual harassment at work, right? Because I mean, you're asking about my journey. I know very few women in their career progression that have not encountered sexual harassment one way or another. We once did a small survey, and some of the women said, you exaggerate, it's not that bad. I said, think about it again. And on the second time, they were like, oh my God, this has actually happened to me. And the men in the room asked, how do you know the boundaries of what constitutes sexual harassment and what doesn't, right? And my answer was very simple. I told them, well, if the text that you're going to send, or the message that you're going to send, or the conversation that you're going to have is not appropriate for your mother or your sister, that's it. You've crossed the line. So it's not that complicated, the strategy to fight sexual harassment doesn't have to be very sophisticated. If you want to explain where the boundary is very simple. It's actually quite black and white. And one of the other discussion that we had, we said, okay, we'll have a zero tolerance to sexual harassment. And one of the men in the room once again said, but what if she's lying? I said, well, in my experience, there's not a single isolated act of sexual harassment. If you're a sexual harasser, you'll have done it probably a dozen of times, right? So the likelihood that 12 women are going to conspire against you in one workplace is very low. So being able to identify some of these, I would say, life events that can translate into strategies as you communicate around some of these issues that at face value sound very complicated, but in reality, they're not that complex, if I can put it like this. So once you break it down into real life events and real scenarios, then people start seeing what the bias actually is, right? People start seeing how, the number of times that women don't speak in the room. People start seeing the number of times that you sit in the room and, you're being told to go fetch tea. People start seeing all these insidious, little biases that happen. And I think for us in a modern professional setting, it's quite telling because, you're given quite a bit of space. But for women who are in a poor environment and very often in rural areas, then it becomes really much harder because there you're dealing with issues which are related to poverty, having access to financial choice, being able to make your own financial choice, being able to have your voice heard. And you're dealing with two problems. One, the mindset, and two, the poverty part, where you don't have agency over what you want to say. But the strategies, I would say, what has worked for Rwanda is to go back, look at our tradition, look at how we used to do things, and adapt to the modern world, and remind people that, guys, this is not something new. This is something that we used to do. We just lost it. So let's come back to our ways. So my final point on that is really who is in the room as the conversation is happening is extremely important. I cannot tell you the number of times that we've had discussions around biases, and all the women in the rooms kind of look at each other and say, you mean that's not obvious? You don't see that as a problem? And the men are kind of looking at us lost, you know? So having the women at the table, and I must say that's something that our leadership did really well, is making sure that we are in the room, and then in the room we're able to voice, you know, what our opinions are, and the underlying, I would say the underlying message is that diversity is strength, diversity is force. Having women in the room actually adds value to the dialogue and the discussions.
Absolutely. And it's interesting, I think, with a lot of things, you know, we need to humanize it in a way. Think about it in human terms, person to person, and the answers will become much clearer. When you're responsible for such a huge portfolio development, how do you place the issue, women's issues at the, I'm sure you place them centrally at the core of your work, but did you have any challenges doing so in rolling out your programs? What are some of the lessons you could share with us?
So one of the challenges we are battling with now is really how do we get women economically engaged in non-traditional sectors, like manufacturing, like the STEM sectors. So maybe let me backtrack a bit. I think the world now has a sense of what the jobs of the future actually are going to be. We do have a sense of 20 years from now, which will be the high-paying jobs, which will be the jobs that likely are going to be automated, and which are the jobs that are going to lose value in terms of maybe even the pay that are being paid for those skills and those jobs. Now, what is concerning is that the jobs that are considered high-paying jobs and high-value jobs are the areas where we have the least women. So the challenge now is how do you create a pipeline of women to prepare them from an education point of view, from an exposure point of view, from a soft skill point of view, to be the people who will be able to participate in these high-paying jobs, right?
Yeah.
And that pipeline takes time, because that pipeline means that you must have more girls in STEM, you know, science, technology, and engineering and math fields. It means that you need to have more women already being in internship in these particular areas that maybe are lower skill but still high value. And creating that pipeline, you know, takes time, because you're now asking them to go into jobs that maybe they do not see really what they will look like in the next 5 to 10 years. But you as a policymaker, you can see that if they miss this wave, then they'll have missed another wave of economic potential, right? So it takes a lot of persuasion to make sure that you get these girls not only to join on the bandwagon of STEM and these higher value fields, finance, and then get them to stick and not redivert to other jobs that are considered more traditional for women. So the challenge that we're having is really, as we are creating this pipeline, as in my job, you know, we're looking at loans, how do I get more women to take that leap of faith and be a little bit more I can say risk-loving, and start businesses in manufacturing, start businesses in the IT sector, start businesses in engineering, start these businesses that are going to thrive in the medium to long term. And I think that is a challenge that we probably share with the world. We're very aggressive about it. And for that, there are some additional complementary investments that need to take place, like making sure that they have access to business advisory services, access to internet. I don't know if you know, but there's a 30% gap in lower middle income country in terms of men versus women just accessing internet, right?
Yeah.
So our Ministry of ICT is very aggressive in making sure that they have devices, they have smartphones, they are connected to the internet, they benefit from this world of knowledge. And these are complementary investments that are actually put together to help them be part of the next wave of high-paying job and high-growth opportunities. But it has to be deliberate, because if it's not deliberate, then you just perpetuate the same cycle of lower pay or the same cycle of having less economic value derived to them.
Absolutely. How do you think we're doing speaking? And I couldn't agree more, you know, and speaking about development, you know, when we think about the world achieving the SDGs, right? We have to think about it as sort of a puzzle that each piece has to complement the other. And I couldn't agree more with the fact that, you know, we have to prepare for the jobs of the future. We have to be aggressive about it. How do you think the global agenda for sustainable development is doing?
So there's a very interesting survey that was released in 2019 about global perspectives, where they asked you know, people from all sorts of countries, low income, high income, what they thought about gender attitudes. And it was quite fascinating that in countries like Japan, 31% of the population surveyed thought that they will never reach gender equality.
Wow.
Or a country like Spain, where they had 23% of the population thought that they will never meet that particular SDG 5. So it's quite telling that it's not necessarily a function of wealth and more a function of social cohesion. And the countries that ranked very highly on that particular survey were countries that are known to have very high social cohesion. So I think a lot has changed. Look, if we look at, you know, my mom's generation, they really had like very little opportunities. If you're not a teacher, you are a nurse. You're not a nurse, you know, you are a housewife, pretty much. Now, my generation has a lot of opportunities in terms of being the kind of jobs that we're currently doing, and that's fantastic, which shows progress on SDG 5, right?
Yeah.
For me, success would be if the next generation gets to do what they do and not be a headline, right?
Yes.
Because right now we're still the generation with, you know, the first, recently in Rwanda, we had the first female referee, you know, who was able to referee a males match at the CAN, which is like the African Cup of Nations.
That's amazing.
And it's a big thing, right? Like it's a really big thing to have a female referee in an all-male match.
Yeah.
But I'm hoping that for my daughter, it will not be a big thing. That will have like hundreds of female referees. So for me, the ambition of SDG 5 is, will we be able to make these things normal? The goal of gender equality should be that, you know, 1 or 2 generations from now, these young girls should not bear the weight of having to be the first. Because they are girls. They should be the first person to do something. I mean, that's fantastic. But the headline should not be that they were the first woman or the first girl to do this. And for me, that would be an achievement in itself, if that makes sense. Then we'll have reached SDG 5, like properly. The second thing is also something that, for me, you're asking about my personal experience, is to what extent are we promoting SDG 5 by trying to create a myth of superwomen, you know, women that can do it all? To what extent are we projecting as role models to the next generation that you should be able to do it all? You should be a super mom, you should be a CEO, you should be a driver of change in your community, you should. And all at the same time for you to be a fulfilled woman. I think is a completely unreasonable expectation. I often say this story. I asked this question once to Madame Christine Lagarde, who used to be the MD of IMF when she visited Rwanda. And she said, look, Kampeta, I was never all of these things at the same time. There's a time in my life where I was a super mom, but I was not doing, maybe I was not very aggressive professionally. There's a time when I was very aggressive professionally, but you know, I was a little bit absent for my kids. And the lesson is really, it does take a village, right? It does take a village, and to what extent are communities and our countries able to create the support system that enables women to make certain choices, as opposed to pushing that responsibility to the women and say, hey, you go be great, be a CEO, be a mom, da, 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 da. But you don't have access to support at home in terms of your childcare. Childcare is very expensive. Forget about being able to have flexible hours. Like do it like we're doing as men.
Yeah.
And for me, that's really the wrong way, because that's, like a quick path down mental health issues for women. And we need to be able,
unrealistic.
It's completely unrealistic. So we need to be able to say and have this conversation and say, yes, so-and-so is the CEO of a bank or is doing this and that, but look at the support system that she has behind her. Exactly. Like, let's also show that part. Let's show them the village that is enabling some of us, to take the strides that we're taking because we're given a platform. And I feel like very often we're showing a super cape, but we're not showing the village. And yet it does take a village for some of us to be able to do the things that we do. Absolutely. So as we think about role modeling, as we think about SDG 5, it's not only about providing a platform for women saying, hey, now you can be a CEO, but it's also saying, hey, you can be a CEO and look at the support system that we're putting around you for you to be able to do it without feeling guilty that you're giving up on your family or your other functions in society.
Yeah, I go back when you're talking about this, and I always have, we're going to start up the Q&A in a minute. I always talk to my team about, in these conversations, visions and journeys, it goes back to this question of how do you maintain a work-life balance? And it's one of the questions that I find most annoying because it's a question of architecture. Right?
Yes.
It's showing that village.
Yes.
It's showing the whole support system, the ecosystem around you that you need to be able to succeed. And that question is never asked of men. How do you have work-life balance? But it's also his responsibility too, to be an equal partner in the family. So it's a question of redesigning. I could have a conversation with you for 2 hours, but I'm not going to be selfish. Let's open it up to our guests in the audience. We have a question over there.
Hi, my name is Anna. I'm from Germany, so I'm really, we came here by surprise, and I'm really intrigued by all the stuff you said. I'm really impressed, especially by the architecture that you provide to support women. And even though I'm from Germany, I can say equality is even not there yet in a full way. So another thing, despite from the architecture part, is the mindset. And I think you, right in the beginning, you talked about role models and how they are helpful. Personally, like, even though we live in this year and there have been women before me, there are so few that I personally have never found a role model before. And I think another really special point about mindset is, how do you talk to a single person? So I think I read the book Factfulness, and I read that when women are supposed to discuss race, like a race in how much money they earn, they need different approaches than men do. Men just go in and say, well, I want 10% more. And women will most likely go in and say, we are happy with the money we make. And so equality for me is, and also regarding to the book, is not reached by equal measures, but by targeting like what the person needs to make it there. So in that case, when women were told, yeah, well, you are holding this discussion also to provide your family, they're more likely to discuss a race. So this is like the more female mindset that needs to be targeted. Also, as a woman, I feel like you will never make everyone happy. Like, especially when you quoted Christine Lagarde, I bet in the time she was a good mother. She heard she wasn't doing enough for work. I think a special thing is when you go back after maternity leave, no one ever will say you've done a great job. On the one hand, also women will say, well, you have left your child too early. At work, they said, why haven't you come back earlier? Or if you do part-time, you're never doing enough on either side. So maybe we can go into the more female perspective, like what mindset do you have to target there, especially in the contrast to men? And I think also maybe to explain to men why we do these special measures is that we can also offer them to them. They will simply not use them because they are not in the need of them.
You're making, if I may.
Yes. Sorry, it was quite long.
No, you're making very interesting points. You know, I'll give you my personal experience. We did a salary review of the salaries of the institution where I am currently, BRD. And I was quite shocked to see there was a 13% difference between female managers and male managers. And yet in Rwanda, there's no inherent issue of equal pay. So clearly, this was an issue with my institution. So I was quite challenged as a CEO. And exactly what you said. Women come, they would come to the bank, and they would come because they've made a decision that they will come to the bank. And therefore, at the entry point, they will not negotiate. They will take what you're giving them, right? Men come, they know they want to come to the bank, but they'll negotiate up to the last minute and make you feel like they're doing you a favor. And therefore, there's a tendency for HR to actually add a premium to make sure that they come to the bank, right? When we changed the mode of salary negotiations at entry and changed the policy, we said, look, we're now going to pay people based on the salary band and their peers. And if whether you're a man or a woman, we're no longer asking you, how much do you expect from this job? We make you an offer. And with that offer, that's the best offer we have to give you. You take it or you leave it. That equal pay, that pay gap completely disappeared. Of course, we also adjusted the salary to make sure that we close the pay gap. But exactly what you're saying, when we moved to making an offer based on peers and experience, as opposed to the negotiation skill, just that one policy, like completely erased the pay gap. And that applies to so many other things. I like the point that you're making around being at peace with your choice. And I think that's really the message that Madame Lagarde was trying to communicate, is to say, take your life as a 70-year time frame and make peace with the fact that at different point of your life, you will do different things. And you will be judged by society differently, but who cares? You know, your life ends in 70 years, maybe. Yeah. At the time I was 20, so she was wishing me a long life. But I think because society teaches us to be judged from a very young age, you constantly try to balance things. Men don't balance. Like, they're very ruthless about what they want to do in general. A few men balance. And I think it's really, I saw at the expo, there's a young boy, they asked about gender equality, Marcus, who stand on the video, who said, it's the freedom of choice. And I kind of feel that often society gives us freedom of choice, but when you choose, they don't like it. Right? So the capacity of saying, well, thank you for the freedom of choice, and I've actually taken that freedom of choice, and if you don't like it, that's very unfortunate, because I still have 50 years ahead of me, and if this is a mistake, I'll figure it out myself, is a freedom that often we're either not given, or sometimes because of the upbringing, we've not been given, or we've not given to ourselves. I always say I was raised by a very, very strong woman, my mom. And the one skill she taught me that helps me up to now is the power to contest. The power to protest and contest. And say, no, I don't agree. And be very comfortable with that. And of course, it makes for very awkward conversations at times, because people expect you to be a little bit more amiable and, you know, light gray and, you know, to say it in a very, but when you tell people, well, I understand what you want, unfortunately, I don't agree, so let's agree to disagree, is a very powerful way to sometimes put your point across. But I agree with you, it's not something we teach girls. It really, truly is not. And I think it's something that is being taught when you grow up. The more you get oppressed and pushed, the more you deprive yourself from that capacity to actually make choices. Just for a little story, I have a young daughter, and when she was 4, I was driving with her, and she asked me, she said, Mom, can girls be anything that they want to be? And I said, of course. The feminist in me was like, of course, you can be an engineer, you can be a pilot, you can be this. I said, what do you want to be, Nema? And she said, well, I want to be a tiger. I was like, okay, that's going to be a tougher one. But I honestly, at that point, was very proud of the society I live in, because in her head, it was not about gender discrimination. It was a genuine question about, what she saw were the world of possibilities. And I often say, for me, this story is kind of the story of my country, that the best gift that we can give our society is allowing women the freedom of choice, regardless of the environment.
Yes.
Thank you so much. That was super inspiring, especially to hear as a young woman.
Thank you. We have a question from our online audience. What life changes should I make as a woman to enable me grow in my work and as a person? And Joyce Lee is asking about the changes in her life and the advice to climb up the corporate ladder.
Interesting. I think it's back to the question from Anna, is the power of saying no. I think if you want to climb the corporate ladder, you have, of course, the usual requirements: work hard, network, be the first one to put your hand up, be noticed, be present, be intentional. Unfortunately, go the extra mile, because that is what is going to get noticed. But in my personal experience, and I've evolved in a very male-dominated environment of finance, is when you actually say no, people respect it. People know you mean business if you're able to say no.
Yeah.
If you think that you're going to climb the corporate ladder by always saying yes, you end up with very little respect. So I have found in my personal experience that being able to say, well, no, not no, but not no explaining, no, like a firm communication of your intent and just communicating why afterwards, but in a very polite way, earns you mad respect. The second thing is really, I always say there are people who share your values and people who don't. And usually you meet somebody and you click, right? Like you meet, like we met and we clicked. Usually when you're in a professional environment and you click with someone, build on that relationship. Like nurture it. Reach out to the person, nurture that relationship, because typically these are people who build bridges for you to move from one place to another. I don't believe that anybody's self-made. I don't think that exists. I think people build bridges for each other, and being able in a professional environment to kind of determine who do you click with and can you build a bridge for them and can they build a bridge for you is very powerful. And the second thing that I find, I was taught by another woman, is the power of gratitude, which I think is underused in a professional environment. The power of saying thank you. You did this for me, really thank you. You did this for my country, really thank you. You did this for my institution, thank you. Because it's so rare in the professional environment, because we are almost emotionless.
Yes.
when you do take the time to personalize a gratitude message, it actually touches people, and you've just built another bridge. And I think this expo is one of the ways, of building, connecting people, building bridges. And a lot of the people who do well professionally are people who have the extraordinary capacity of building bridges, more so than people who are technically excellent.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. But I am going to follow your advice on saying no. I'm going to take that. I'm a yes person. Do we have any other questions? Yes.
Sorry, I begin by apologizing. I came in late. Maybe what I'm going to say might have been referred to. And at the same time, I begin by apologizing because I'm going to say something from my heart. I don't know that it's out of place. I'm a very staunch Catholic, and I admire that institution. Reasons: they focus and build a person and make him or her what they exactly want. And if you deflect from the principles they trained you, you really look outcast and out of place. When they train priests, they train them in institutions called seminaries. And they prepare them to be priests. When they prepare nuns, they prepare them in an institution called a convent, and they groom them to become exactly what nuns should be in that institution. With the little I've picked here, and as an educationist, greedy educationist, I wonder why, with all that has been going on for a million years and years, why don't we set up centers of excellence for girls, groom them in exactly all this you have been saying, and see after 20 years what comes out of them and what impact they have in the world in all the aspects you have talked about. It's just my crazy idea. Thank you.
Thank you.
So
Thank you.
I have very strong views about it. We have centers of excellence, I think, around the world for girls. But I think that's not where the problem is. I think we need to discuss about how we raise our boys. Because the power does not lie with the girls. It's not that the girl has refused to be a CEO. It's not that she's refused to do, extra classes in science. If you're a rural girl, you simply don't have the time to do those extra classes. Your family most likely is not going to choose to pay for you, they'll choose to pay for your brother. If you are a woman in a professional environment and you're coming back from maternity leave, it's not that you don't want to take the next training opportunity, is you simply can't. So I think the success story of Rwanda is that men changed their mind. It's not that women became superior or better trained or better professionals. It's not. I believe that an average woman is as intelligent as an average woman in Japan that sees that she has no way out of the gender cycle, the gender oppression cycle. So for me, I think the conversation has been framed in the wrong way. Can we start teaching our boys to take more responsibilities at home? Can we start teaching our boys to be supportive of their sisters living home and living alone even though they're not married? Can we start teaching our men to allow women in the workplace to take their kids and their nannies for training? Can we start normalizing having pads in the bathrooms? Can we start normalizing having, a formula for sharing the floor in some of these public environments? So I think the point that you've made is part of the problem, with all due respect, because we're teaching the wrong people. Girls are ready to be great. They don't need training to be great. They're ready. So rather, we need to think about what are all these obstacles that society, which is still a society that is led by men, have put on the way to their greatness. And then let's remove these obstacles. Let's partner with the men to remove these obstacles. And earlier I was saying sometimes it's not done deliberately to annoy or frustrate women. It's not. I think sometimes men act in good faith, but they do not realize that this is actually an obstacle. By doing this, you've actually stopped the journey of X amount of women. So this is why we need to have more women in the room. This is why we need to have women talk about these issues, to kind of talk about this particular bias, where we can together discuss this bias is an obstacle to the next girl on her way. Can we remove it? I think it's more talking to the right people. I think men need to change a lot. I agree that we have these types of panels are very powerful to kind of open the eyes of everybody, but I think we're talking to the wrong crowd. We don't need to talk to women. I think we need to talk to the men in the room, and we need to bring them on board, and they need to own this process, because by owning this process, as the Women Pavilion says, we're changing society, humanity will thrive. But we're talking to the wrong crowd. And you know, oppression is not, even though we talk about patriarchy a lot in these discussions, is not necessarily perpetuated by patriarchy, by men. Patriarchy can be perpetuated by women as well.
Yeah.
Right? So I'm not blaming men saying, you know, you guys are bad people. I'm just saying we have built a system that is based on a patriarchal type of model. And where the world is now, that model needs to change. And for it to change, I think we need to have a discussion about what is patriarchy, right? And because the numbers are clear, I mean, I was looking at the numbers downstairs. I think we have 22 female leaders out of all the nations of the world. It is clear that if we want to remove patriarchy, the 22 ladies are not going to make it for 192 countries, right? So we need to have people like we are glad to have in Rwanda, like my president, who are able to have a visionary leadership and say, I will play my role to remove a toxic patriarchal system in my country, to choose a more modern system that is based on our traditional values where women were valued, right? So that's how I would answer your question.
Good enough? Okay, last question.
I want to thank the moderator and the speaker. This discussion is very interesting, especially for us women in business. We want to be able to hire people who want to be able to hire women. We want to be able to say we have changed the narrative from ourselves. So, Madam Kampeta, first of all, I want to congratulate you for the job that your bank, the Development Bank of Rwanda, is doing in investing in education. But also, I wanted to ask if there is a special program to invest in the job of the future. I'm asking because many women are not happy with how much they are making right now, and they see need to do a career shift. But to do a career shift will require that you invest into another degree. So you already are not making enough money, you don't have time with what we have been identified as balancing between your life and your career. So making another investment into another degree seems to be very expensive, unless if banks like yours or governments are willing to adapt with the new system, where there should also be scholarship for people who are already advanced in their career and they want to make a career shift. So I wanted to ask if this is something that could be considered in Rwanda with the amazing progress we're doing. Thank you.
I think it's a very interesting question about career shifts and how many careers can you have in one life. I think in the past it used to be one, you'd get one job and you'd get old in that job, and now we're seeing that the world is evolving so quickly, right?
It's the limit, yeah. Yes.
I think it's a very powerful question, and it's something that we're looking at to try to say, yes, on one hand, there's education and access to education, but on the second hand, there's also, as a nation, how ready are we to support startups in these areas of the future, right? Where does the equity come from? Where does the financing come from? Where does the skills development that you've mentioned come from? So it's a conversation that is currently ongoing with the Ministries of Education and Innovation and ICT. And the good thing is there's now a deliberate effort to transition our young people, especially, and our women, to these new career or high-paying jobs of the future. So how we create that bridge in the way that, because resources are still constrained, in the way that doesn't affect, the work that has been ongoing in also getting the younger generation to be fully educated, is a balancing that we're working on. But what I can tell you, it's at the heart of our discussions at the policy level.
Okay, thank you very much. Maybe also to add on that, I always seeing career as a business. You have said it's startups and everything. So I don't know if in Africa there is already some banks who understand about financing people to be better. So already financing startups are still an issue, but also is there any way of financing talents?
So I think there are two ways of looking at financing for talents. The first one is kind of the traditional way, which you're mentioning, of banks giving loans, to people who have projects. The second way, which is more modern, I would say, is really through private equity fund and angel investors. And a lot of the work that is currently being done through the Ministry of ICT and Innovation is how do we make Rwanda a destination country? And I speak about Rwanda because I'm not very familiar, I don't speak on behalf of other countries, but how do we make Rwanda an ideal destination for such funds? And the idea really is to say we must have a legal conducive environment, we must have a tax environment, we must have a pipeline of talent and projects that is available. So a lot of the work that we are currently doing with institutions like RDB, Rwanda Finance Limited, and the Ministry of Innovation and ICT is really to say, how do we bring these new sources of investment into our country? How do we make Rwanda stand out on the map of Africa as an ideal destination for these types of funds? And I must say we've started to get results. As you may know, there's a new fund from Afrexim Bank that has established in Rwanda. I have my colleagues from Rwanda Finance Limited that have events here to make sure that we are able to draw in this capital and have it not only benefit Rwandan youth, but also benefit the region. And we are positioning Rwanda now as a regional hub, as an African hub, as a destination as a financial center. So it's about drawing the right flows of capital and also making sure that we have the ecosystem that supports this capital by having projects ready, skills development programs, and having the right working environment.
Kampeta, with you at the helm of such a vision, I'm sure Rwanda will be successful. I'm sure that your work will contribute in achieving what you have in mind, and I hope that we're all there to see it come true and see Rwanda blossom even more and flourish. I think we've come to the end of time. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you, Kampeta, for sharing your wisdom with us. You have truly given us little nuggets of wisdom that we will hold on to, and I hope that our audience has also taken in what you've said, and we will certainly be thinking about what you said, and we hope that you can remain engaged with us. And we do hope that the Women's Pavilion can leave an impact, can leave some kind of legacy behind, and be a space for women everywhere to continue these conversations. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Hind, for having me, and follow Rwanda. A lot of good things are coming forth.
Inshallah.
Thank you.